Western officials have said Russia is looking to double or even treble the number of forces it has in the Donbass region as part of the next phase of its military campaign in Ukraine. The comments come after US officials said they've seen indications that Russian forces are resupplying and reinforcing troops in the region. I'm joined now by General Sir Richard Barrons, former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command. Good to talk to you, General. So, I mean, all the focus now seems to be on the Donbass region in the east and southeast. In essence, it seems to be a much narrower military ambition for Putin, but nevertheless, the likelihood is a pretty intense onslaught. Is that the way you see it?
Yes, it is. I think the Russian armed forces have learnt some hard lessons from the failure of their initial campaign. And they've now decided to have rather more modest objectives, to do one thing at once and to concentrate all their forces, so ground forces, air forces, logistics, command and control on the Donbass, in what will become, I think, by far the biggest battle of this war so far.
Right. And I mean, they prepared for some while, if you believe what UK and US intelligence were saying on the border before the actual invasion, the initial invasion. I mean, what about, how are they going to prepare for this? They've got troops who are presumably, some of whom have already fought or been fighting in Ukraine, who'll be tired and they'd be sort of retreated to Belarus or other areas across the border. I mean, how easy and how quickly can they muster the force to do what they want to do?
So we now know, and it's a little bizarre, that actually before the invasion began on the 24th of February, most of the Russian forces weren't doing very much more than camping, because we've seen a huge deficiency in planning and preparation and equipment maintenance and logistics and training. And all of that explains some of their poor performance so far. And you're absolutely right that at least 25% of the Russian ground forces that started the war have been severely mauled by the Ukrainians and are having to be merged and refitted. But we are nonetheless seeing more forces being moved round to the Donbass, which is about the size of Switzerland, roughly. And we're seeing reinforcements arriving from elsewhere in Russia and more equipment. So we are likely to see very much larger Russian forces concentrating to assault the Donbass from the east, which is where the Ukrainians are used to seeing them, but also from the north and the south in an attempt to encircle what would be about 2/5 of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Right, and part of this will be to complete their assault on the city of Mariupol and take that city.
Yes, of course. So Mariupol is part of the Donbass. When it falls, and it looks like it will in a matter of days probably, that will liberate Russian forces that are able then to begin to move north to get behind perhaps the Ukrainian positions in the Donbass. And they'll do that in step with the Russian forces coming down from the north, moving south. And that's the dilemma for the Ukrainian military, who've done really well in the Donbass. It's the best bits of the Ukrainian military, but they're now going to have to deal with Russians to their east, but also to their north and their south.
And given all that, how likely is it that the Ukrainians can stop President Putin taking another large chunk of the country?
So the Ukrainians have some reasons to be confident. They're in very well-prepared positions now. They're very experienced. They've been fighting for 8 years. The Russian forces, as you described earlier, aren't going to be very much better prepared or equipped. So they may just be large but a bit clumsy. And the weakness for the Ukrainian military is that they need weapons and money and support, and they'll need their casualties dealing with at the end of what are quite extended lines of communication. And so the critical part of this battle will be, can the Ukrainian forces hold on and be supplied well enough? And will the Russians be any better to try and break through a stiff Ukrainian defense?
And is this a different sort of warfare than we've seen elsewhere in Ukraine? And will they need other weapons? And are they going to get them?
So it is different. It's different in terms of scale, but some of the ground, particularly in the south of the Donbass, will allow the Russian tanks and armoured infantry and armoured artillery to manoeuvre across open countryside. They'll be much less confined to the roads in the way that they were around Kiev. And that's what allowed the Ukrainian armed forces to ambush them so successfully from the flanks, generally using the weapons that the West had provided. So they may propose a very different problem to the Ukrainian military. And we should also remember the Russian Air Force is currently conducting about 250 attacks a day on the Donbass. So there's a significant amount of firepower being concentrated on the Ukrainian forces. To that extent, it is different. And the Ukrainian military want weapons that have more range, are more precise, so they destroy armor at distance, and are more lethal. And they have some of that, but they don't have perhaps enough of it. And there's not much the West can do to give them brand new equipment because they haven't got time to learn to use it or maintain it.
And well, that was going to be my next question. So and my other thought is, President Putin will want some sort of victory, won't he? I mean, he's hardly likely to agree to some sort of negotiation without something he can take back to the Russian people. I just wondered, finally, what do you think that victory could look like for Putin, that he can, then say, well, I've got what I want?
So when this phase of the war started on the 24th of February, the Russians had occupied about a third of the Donbass. And President Putin's objective may be to take the other 2/3. That's going to be a very stiff fight. And he may think that they could, if they did that successfully and quickly, press on to the Dnieper River and essentially annex a large chunk of Ukraine. That is absolutely not something that Ukraine or the West will settle for. They'll feel that President Putin essentially has to be seen to lose this war in the eyes of the global community. And perhaps if he leaves this war with the land he started with, that might be a position for a negotiation, which is one of the reasons why this is likely to dissolve into a very difficult stalemate.
Right. So a pretty brutal few weeks or few months possibly ahead?
Yes, to do this, given the Russian performance so far, they will have to factor on weeks becoming months to batter their way through these Ukrainian positions, unless some game changer occurs in the breaking of the Ukrainian will. But I think that's pretty unlikely.
General Barrons, thank you very much indeed.